Welcome back to our series on Introduction to the Financial Services Industry. In this video, and hopefully I can squeeze it all into one video, we're going to do a quick introduction to FINRA and Series 99. In this video, I'm putting in the playlist under regulatory. So we're just going to introduce FINRA and introduce Series 99 registration and some of the other registrations. So with that, we'll get started. Again, this is a basic introduction for a novice. It's not really for experts. If you're an expert, look for other sources. All the information I'm going to present here is readily available in other sources on the internet. And I'm not going to offer any financial advice here. Right now, markets, right? We talk about the financial services industry, and what we're talking about markets for the purchase and sale of financial products, assets. Right? Those are the markets. But for the markets to operate and operate effectively, it requires trust. If you don't have trust, if the consumers, if the customers, if the investors don't have some trust in the markets will not operate efficiently, right? So if you're going to invest your money, you have to trust the markets that the game is fair, that it's not rigged, that you're not going to give your investment money to a broker and that they're going to steal the money or they're going to deal with you in bad faith. So for the markets to operate effectively, there has to be trust. This is a very, very, very important concept in our financial system. The financial system only operates, it only works if there's trust. And in the US markets, there's a high degree of trust. So therefore, the markets here are very reliable and very efficient. Now, why do we need regulation, right? So in order to have trust in the markets, we have regulations, we have regulatory authorities, we have regulatory bodies. We have people who are they're the umpires, they're the referees. We have some level of regulation to ensure that the markets operate efficiently and effectively and fairly and build that trust. Now, this handsome young immigrant is one of the reasons why we have to have very strict regulations. So we'll see how many of you will recognize this dapper young entrepreneur. And with that, I'll start by saying he's tied to something called an international reply coupon, which is a security that basically is used to exchange for postage stamps. And the reason what it was used for was it was used for cross-border transactions, business transactions. You send a letter to somebody, you send a business correspondence. When you include one of these certificates, the certificate can be redeemed for a postage stamp in that local country. So if you're a business in the United Kingdom and you're doing business in Germany and you have to send letters and correspondence, by including these international reply coupons, the coupon can be exchanged by the counterparty for the local postage. So basically, it's a coupon that can be exchanged for postage stamps. Now, why am I talking about this? Because following World War I, there was a great disparity in the cost of postage stamps. A first-class mail stamp in the United Kingdom would vary widely with a first-class stamp in Germany or in Italy or in France or in some other country or in the United States. Okay. Now today, this isn't the case. Today, these, the selling price and the exchange value of these stamps, are adjusted, and you can't really arbitrage this. But for a brief period of time after World War I, You could buy this international apply coupon in one country where, let's say, a stamp cost a penny, and you could redeem it in another country where a stamp cost 10 cents. I'm just making this up. But that's the concept. So if you had this coupon, in theory, if you bought it in country A and you could redeem it for postage in country B, so let's say you bought it for 1 cent and you bought it for a penny and you could redeem it for 10 cents, you could make nine cents on each coupon. So in theory, that's what you could do. It was an arbitrage. Now, so for a brief period following World War I, this was the case. So comes along our immigrant I mentioned a little while ago, and his name was Charles Ponzi. He was an Italian immigrant to the United States, and he noticed this, and he promised investors, give them their money, and he was going to buy up these coupons, and he promised his clients a 50% profit in 45 days, under the idea that he would buy these coupons in one country, redeem them in another, and make a profit on the postage stamps, be able to sell the postage stamps. So he was saying, if you give him money, he would make 50% profit for you in 45 days and 100% in 90 days. So if you gave him $100 in 90 days, he could give you $200. And actually, initially, for the first few people who invested with him, it worked. He was able to pay them off this. Now, obviously, this is where we get into the whole thing. Is in reality, Ponzi was paying early investors using the investments of the later investors. This practice, known as robbing Peter to pay Paul, while his swindle predated a Ponzi by several. While this type of swindle had been around for years, it became closely linked to his name. And the scheme ran for over 1 year before it collapsed. So what he would do is he would take the investors' money, the first round investors' money, he would collect their money, and he would use it to pay. Then he would collect a second round of investors, and he would use the money from the second round to pay off the first round investors. And then he would recruit more people to the scam and use the third round investors to pay off the second round, and so on and so forth. And in doing so, that's a Ponzi scheme, right? Or that's a rob Peter and pay Paul scheme. So Ponzi did this, and this all collapsed after a year, but it was widely publicized and widely covered in the US. So again, what's a Ponzi scheme? Ponzi schemes are these pyramids. And there's a lot of this. And oddly enough, even though this all existed before Ponzi, Antonio Ponzi, and it existed after Ponzi, these schemes still exist today. And it's the same thing. It's a schemer. You get the first round, you get their money, and then you get money for the second round to pay the first round, and so forth. The problem here is arithmetic progression, right? You get as you keep doubling each tier, it becomes impossible to keep up, to raise enough money in the scheme to keep funding it. And again, I mean, if you look at any Ponzi scheme, if the first tier, the top of the pyramid, you recruit 6 people to the scheme, you need 36 people in the second tier, and it goes on and on and on. By the time you get to the 13th level, you need more people than there are people on the planet, right? You need 16 billion people to keep this going, right? By the 11th, you would need every man, woman, and child in the United States. So it's really, this is arithmetic progression is doubling. It's this whole operation. So Ponzi did this, and he wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last. There have been other people done these schemes. Now, That's following World War I. What happens on October 1929 is the Great Depression hits. So the Great Depression hits in 1929, stock markets crash. People were over leveraged. People were borrowing money to put into the markets. People who never should have been investing were speculating. They were mortgaging their properties. They were borrowing money from relatives. They were making all sorts of crazy investments, and they put it into the stock market. The stock market crashed and put the world into a global depression. The depression in the 1920s and 1930s was unlike anything we've seen since then. Now, I've lived through in my life several economic downturns and recessions, but we've had nothing like the absolute devastation of the global economy that we had with the Great Depression. And basically, it really scarred people. It scared people because people who had money with the banks lost their money in the banks. The bank would close and they didn't get their money back. People who had money in stock, they had their life savings, they had their retirement money, it all evaporated. So not only did they lose everything, but that the companies couldn't borrow, companies shut down, people had money to spend, so they couldn't hire people, so people became jobless. And it just created a spiral of a downward global economy, which economists can argue about, but effectively didn't end until World War II, which was sometime later, more than 10 years later, right? So what happened, right? As a result of the Great Depression in the United States, the Congress realized in order to people had lost trust. Remember I talked about the first slide that in order for the markets to operate effectively, people have to have trust. People in this country, people globally lost trust in the markets. So the markets became ineffective. That meant that the businesses, legitimate business, couldn't borrow. They couldn't raise capital. They couldn't, there was no money to make. So it was awful. So in order to help build back the trust, the U.S. started taking actions. So the Securities and Exchange Commission was created. And it's a government commission created by Congress to regulate the securities market and protect investors. In addition, it regulates, and in addition to regulation protection, it also monitors the corporate takeovers in the U.S., where one corporation takes another. The SEC is composed of 5 commissioners appointed by the U.S. president and approved by the Senate. The statutes administered by the SEC are designed to promote full public disclosure and to protect the investing public against fraudulent or manipulative practices in the security market. So the SEC is a government-created organization created by Congress to oversee and bring trust, bring fair regulation, bring trust back into the markets. By the way, they also did other things at that time too. They did banking regulations. So like the FDIC insured, so that if you put your money in the bank couldn't just go out of business, keep your money. So there was some insurance, you would get some of your money back up to some number. So the SEC is created. Generally, most issues of securities offered in interstate commerce through mail or on the internet must be registered with the SEC. So if you have a security, if you have an asset, if you have a stock, you have a bond, and you're going to trade it in a public market, not a private exchange, not a private transaction, but if you're going to trade it publicly, right, over the mail, through the internet, in an exchange, it has to be registered with the SEC. So the SEC rose out of the ashes of the Great Depression, right, of the stock market crash in 1929. After the crash and the ensuing depression, confidence in the markets fell to an all-time low. Congress held hearings to identify problems in the markets and concluded that the faith in the system needed to be restored. As such, the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 were passed. These acts were designed to restore investor confidence through 2 main principles. One, companies offering securities to the public must be truthful about their businesses and the risks involved in investing. Two, companies that sell and trade securities, brokers, dealers, and exchanges, must treat all investors fairly and honestly. So those are the two key principles of the SEC, right? A US government authority. Now, why do we need the SEC? That's why we need the SEC. We need the SEC to build trust, and take fear out of the market. Right? Now, what is FINRA? So we talk about the SEC, which is a government organization. Now we're going to talk about FINRA, which is not government. FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, FINRA. The Financial Institution Regulatory Authority is a regulatory body created after the merger of the National Association of Securities Dealers and the New York Stock Exchange Regulatory Committee, Regulations Committee. Now, those are two industry bodies. They aren't government bodies. So these two industry groups, the National Association of Securities Dealers and the New York Stock Exchange Regulations Committee, they came together, they merged, and they formed an industry group called FINRA to provide industry oversight. Financial Industry Regulatory Authority is responsible for governing business between brokers, dealers, and investing public. By consolidating these two regulators, FINRA aims to eliminate regulatory overlap and cost inefficiencies. That's great. But the point here is the industry doesn't want to have the government into everything they do. So although the SEC is the government oversight, the industry created its own regulatory body to police themselves, and that's FINRA. So, So what's the difference between the SEC and FINRA? Securities Exchange Commission is a governmental body. The primary mission of the SEC is to protect investors and maintain the integrity of the securities markets. FINRA is an industry organization. FINRA is the largest self-regulatory organization in the securities industry in the United States. As a self-regulating organization, is a membership-based organization that creates and enforces rules for members based on the federal securities laws. And FINRA is overseen by the SEC and are the front line for regulating brokers. So brokers, if you're a broker and you want to do business, you have to be a member of FINRA. You have to become a member of FINRA pretty much. And you have to meet FINRA's industry rules and industry regulations. So it's the self-policing by the industry. That's what FINRA is. So what is the difference between the SEC and FINRA? To summarize, the SEC is responsible for ensuring the investors and the firms. FINRA is responsible for overseeing virtually all U.S. stockbrokers and brokerage firms. So the FINRA is the government authority with oversight for individual investors, and FINRA is the oversight for virtually all stockbrokers who are and member firms. In the grand scheme of things, FINRA is overseen by the SEC. That's how you think about it. Now, if you're a broker and you're and your firm is a member of FINRA, you have to be a member of FINRA to operate in the markets. You can't be a broker dealing with the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or any of the other exchanges unless you're a member of FINRA. So if you're a member firm with FINRA, the people who work in your organization, salespeople, the branch managers, the department supervisors, all the officers and directors, they have to be qualified. And how FINRA handles that is through what's called FINRA registration. Now, you probably all heard of Series 7, Series 6, Series 99. These are different registrations. So if you're an employee of a brokerage firm, you need to be registered with FINRA. You need to have a series registration. So, for instance, a Series 7 is the General Securities Representative. So, if you have a job in that brokerage firm as a securities representative, you're on the phone doing sales, talking to customers, that job is probably a Series 7 job, most likely, although there are jobs that don't require registration. But if your job is a job that meets the criteria where it has to be registered, you have to obtain this registration, and you have to sit for a test and have a background check, and they have to make sure that you don't have a criminal record and that you're qualified. And you got to take a written test that's very strictly administered. You can't cheat on. You have to continue education to maintain your status. So depending upon your job, you need certain registrations. If you're a branch manager, you need a special supervisor's registration. If you're a dealer in options, I think options. If you're well, like for instance, a sales supervisor would be a Series 23, where you're supervising people. So if you're well, you can go through the list here yourself. Corporate securities representative, Series 62. But the one I'm interested in talking about here today is the Series 99, which was only added a few years ago. And I'm going to talk for a little bit about why it was added. But the point is, based upon your job in a brokerage company, if your brokerage company is regulated by FINRA and is a member of FINRA, your job, you may require that you have this registration and that it's in good order and that it meets all the requirements for registration. And if you lose the registration, you can't function in that job, function with that firm. Okay, so registered persons. Here's a few rules. Once a person becomes registered, they are liable for certain regulations and rules that other members of the brokerage firm aren't necessarily liable for. I mean, the firm might have their own rules, but if you're a registered person, you have certain rules. For example, outside employment. If you're a registered person with Merrill Lynch, or you're a registered person with Charles Schwab, or you're a registered person with TD, Toronto Dominion, whoever, you can't have outside employment, right? Because they want to make sure that whatever you're doing is that you're not operating with multiple conflicts of interest, right? If a registered representative wants to obtain employment outside of their position with a member firm, the registered representative must provide written notification to the employer, and it has to be approved, right? So they're not saying you can't get a part-time job working cleaning houses or something, or working at your family. Let's say your family owns a bar or a restaurant. But they want to make sure that you're not having outside employment that conflicts with your responsibilities as a registered person, where your obligation is to represent the best interest of the client. Also, you can't do private securities transactions. You can't be dealing under the table. You can't be doing backroom deals. No private transactions. There's also strict rules on gifts. A registered person can't be just taking gifts. If I'm a registered person and I'm working in the office and one of the brokers I support, one of the brokers I'm dealing with comes in and says, hey, I've got tickets for, I got 4 tickets I want to give you for you and your family to go to see Hamilton on Broadway. And they're worth about $800. You can't take that gift, right? Or if you do, it has to be declared, and the compliance officer of that firm has to deal with it as an exception or approve it. But there's very strict regulations on gifts. Why? Because we want to make sure the game stays fair and that nobody's giving secret gifts in the back to I won't say bribe, but to influence people. So if once you become a registered person with a firm, there's strict rules about gifts. That's why you'll notice sometimes things that we used to do years ago in the brokerage industry, we no longer do. You also can't share in a customer's account, right? It is permissible for the representative to maintain a joint. It's not permissible for a joint account with the customer as long as the firm approves in advance. You can't share a customer's account. I can't say to you, hey, look, you're my customer. I'm going to set up an account. I'll tell you what to do. I'll give you $5,000 to put in that account, and we'll trade this together, and we'll share the profits. A registered person can't do that, right? Because again, they're trying to take the scheming and the back office deals out and keep the whole market, the system fair. And the broker also can't borrow and lend money to a client. Broker can't say to you, I'll lend you out of my wife's bank account. I'll lend you $10,000 for you to make the investment, and then I'll get paid the commission, and then you can pay me back later. A broker cannot, a registered person cannot borrow or lend money with a customer. And these are just a couple rules I put out there, but there's a lot of these rules. Now, Series 99, as I mentioned, was only created recently. It's a exam administered by FINRA that qualified persons as a registered operational professional. So it's geared not towards the front office, not towards the salesperson, but for the operations people who are working on the clearing, the settlement, the middle office, all that stuff. It licenses for a variety of covered functions, right? The Series 99 exam, some of this has changed slightly because now they require that you take the securities industry exam first. You have to have the SIE exam, has to be completed before you can sit for the Series 99. But basically, you're being sponsored by a member firm, and you're going to sit and take the Series 99. And there's a series of questions. You got 2 hours and 30 minutes to complete the exam. A score of 68 or higher is required to pass. And it's a fairly difficult exam. It's not that easy. The person has to complete training, has to demonstrate competency, has to show that they have experience in the industry, and they also have to show that they have demonstrated character. When I say demonstrate character, they can't have a criminal record, they can't have DUIs, a lot of stuff. Anyone who fails to meet the association's requirement may be rejected, may not become registered. So this is a fairly difficult process. Now, you're going to say, okay, Paul, Series 99 was only created a few years ago. I think it was 7, 8 years ago. Not that long, maybe a little longer. So why was it created? Well, how many of you know this face? Yell out his name if you know this face. This gentleman is named Bernie Madoff. And Bernie Madoff is the reason, really, why the industry determined there was a need for operations professionals to have the Series 99 registration as a requirement, right? He was a former NASDAQ, a chairman and a founder of a market-making firm called Bernie L. Madoff Securities. Basically, he was one of the hugest Ponzi schemes ever. Basically, he ran a scam. He ran a Ponzi scheme. It's hard to believe how bad his scam was. And actually, during the time he ran this scam, regulators and auditors would show up at his office and ask to see documents. And Bernie would say, I'm the big shot. What are you asking me this? And while he was yelling at them in his office, he'd have one of his people run down to the floor below him and create the documents, fraudulent documents. And they would put coffee stains on the papers to make them look like they're old. But he had a whole department that was of technology people and operations people that were creating fraudulent documents, fraudulent account statements, fraudulent transaction documents, fraudulent materials. And one of their excuses later was, well, we were just doing what we were told. our boss asked us to do something, we just did it. So in creating the Series 99, you say, no, wait a minute. You have to have people in operations jobs and in technology oversight jobs who have sufficient knowledge to know what's right and what's wrong, what you can do, what you can't do. Go click again. So again, I mean, this is basically, some of the numbers from the, $36 billion in euros, or, it's just really amazing how much money disappeared. So again, after the Madoff scandal, people saw that, well, it's the back office and the middle office people can be corrupt. So the Series 99 was created to require those jobs to have registration, and again, to bring trust back, to make sure that those functions were could be held liable, and that they were strictly regulated, and there was a level of oversight being provided. Okay, so the new Series 99 exam represents one facet of FINRA's new requirements for senior members of the operations community. So years ago, the people in the operations community, people in the back office jobs, people in the technology jobs didn't have any registration, and now they have to be registered. And that all went in October of 2011. Now, since that has been modified, since then you now have to take the SIE exam before you take the Series 99. And this is basically who needs to do it: operations professionals. The FINRA list of covered persons. FINRA gives guidance on who needs to have the Series 99. It's supervisors of client-facing back office functions, persons who design and implement back office operations and control systems, clerical personnel who hold the Series 6, Series 7 registration are excluded or grandfathered in. And what's on the exam? Again, it's industry knowledge, professional conduct, and ethics. That's what's on the exam. The SIE exam, a little bit, again, as I said, the SIE exam is now required. That's the Securities Industry Essentials exam, SIE. Anybody can sit for it. You don't need to have a brokerage firm sponsor you. It's open to anybody who wants to take it. And it's just a general background, foundations, fundamentals knowledge that you need. And it's got different sections. It's got how many questions on knowledge of the capital markets, understanding of products and their risks, understanding of trading, customer accounts, and prohibitive activities, overview of regulatory framework. So I'm going to give you some sample questions. This comes from a test question, sample test question for the SIE, not the SIE, for the Series 99. So an operations professional at a clearing member firm receives a written complaint from a customer of one of the introducing broker dealers. Which is false? A copy of the complaint must be forwarded to the introducing broker dealer. B, a copy of the complaint must be forwarded to FINRA. C, the customer must get written acknowledgement of receipt of the complaint. Or D, the complaint must be resolved by the clearing firm. So which of those is false? Well, it's D. The clearing firm does not have a day-to-day relationship with the customer. The introducing firm does. That's kind of a trick question. It goes back to when I did one of the earlier presentations where I talked about clearing brokers versus introducing brokers. But the point is, all the other things are true and have to happen, right? The complaint has to be forwarded to the introducing broker. A copy of the complaint has to be forwarded to FINRA, who's going to make sure the claim is followed up on, and the customer gets a written receipt of the complaint. Here's another sample question from the exam. Regarding issuer mailings to beneficiary owners of margin shares, the issuer has access to the name and address of the beneficial owners and performs the mailing directly if the customers are A, objecting beneficiary owners, B, non-objecting beneficiary owners, C, trustee for beneficiary owners, or D, custodians for minors? And the answer is B, NOBO. The use of FINRA name on a firm website is prohibited, permitted without restriction, permitted only if accompanied by a hyperlink to FINRA website, and permitted only if accompanied by a disclaimer that FINRA does not approve of the member. So the use of the FINRA name on a member website is C, permitted only if accompanied by a hyperlink to FINRA website. And believe it or not, they police that. An operations professional at an investment firm is responsible for supervising the outside brokerage accounts of the firm's employees. To comply with this, trade confirmations and statements are received from all outside brokerage accounts. When reviewing these, the operations professional notes that an investment banker has purchased an equity IPO in ABCD stock at the POP through the outside account, which is true. So in other words, the broker did a member of this organization, a banker, investment banker in this organization, bought an IPO, but not using his account at their firm, using another separate account that the banker had at a separate firm. This is permitted because the bankers are in business and can buy IPOs. B, the operations professional must notify FINRA promptly of the purchase because it is a reportable event. C, the operations professional must notify compliance promptly of the purchase because employees from member firms cannot buy IPOs. And the operations professional must notify the investment banker to make sure that the IPO letter was signed. And the answer is C. You got to tell compliance. This individual should not be allowed to do this. It looks suspiciously like you're doing something inappropriate. You have to tell compliance. By the way, when in doubt, call compliance. Write that down. When in doubt, call compliance. That's a good standard to go by. An operations professional wishes to work at her family's bar at night and on weekends. She will not be paid a salary, but will earn tips, which is true. I mean, basically, I talked about it before. This is prohibited unless the operations professional notifies a member firm in writing and follows the firm's instructions. So you would have to tell your company that you're going to do this. In most cases, it's going to be approved, and you won't really have a problem. So those are some quick examples of the sample questions. There's plenty of sites online that you can go to, and they have sample tests, and there are test services you can prepare for, prep classes and prep materials. But if you're interested in the Series 99 or the Security Industry Essentials SIE exam, go and look it up on the internet. There's plenty of places where you can have free sample questions to help you prep, and also good courses. You probably need to take a course. Unless you're somebody who's been working in the industry for a long time, you're going to need to take a prep course. But if you're interested in the topic in general, there's plenty of free sites where you can see sample questions to help you get started. So that was a lot of information for me to go through. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please call me or send me an email. And as you know, I'm happy to answer your questions. I am a consultant. I do offer services. I do provide training, and I also do some pro bono work. So I feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Have a nice day.